Over 6 days of searching, the rescue workers gather bodies and body parts scattered all over the southern German countryside.
By Thursday of that week, 2 days later, the relatives started arriving. They could not all see the bodies we'd found because most of the bodies were badly charred or mutilated. We didn't permit the relatives to view the bodies in that condition.
In Ufa, in western Russia, both Christian and Muslim communities are devastated by the loss of their children. In the cemetery, where 53 of the people in the Tupolev are buried, there are 2 double rows of gravestones, with the Christian Orthodox on one side and the Muslims on the other. It's eerily reminiscent of the seating arrangement on the plane. The monument evokes a flight of paper planes frozen in flight. This is Kirill's grave, the young talented artist. And this is Irina's, the 12-year-old gymnast. Vitaly Khaloyev, who lost his entire family, has designed and built a huge monument in their memory. Day and night, he lingers at the cemetery, inconsolable. At Skyguide in Zurich, after the collision, work has all but come to a standstill.
People were in a state of shock. They were shocked, they were helpless, there was a lot of sadness, people crying. And we were criticized for being too technocratic after the accident. I have to accept that. One of the biggest tasks was to maintain operations, because there were planes coming in, going out after this tragedy, and that was a very, very difficult situation for everybody.
For the next 3 weeks at the Zurich Air Traffic Control Center, capacity is reduced for lack of available controllers. Peter Nielsen never again worked on an air traffic workstation.
If you go through something like that, you're not able to come back. It's too deep in, and it's too big.
From an emotional point of view, of course, it was shattering. It was, for me, really, really terrible. Terrible in the sense that it happened to one of my colleagues, it happened to our profession, but it also happened to families who lost their children.
The hunt begins for a scapegoat. If 2 planes collide in empty skies, someone must be to blame. At first, some suspect the Russians.
The pilot of the Russian plane is said to have ignored repeated instructions from air traffic controllers. And while the
repeatedly, they contacted the Russian pilot and asked him to change altitude because he was flying at a level where he should not have been. Now, the Russian pilot never responded to those warnings from air traffic control.
The Russian pilots, particularly in Soviet times, and also now, but to a lesser extent, were extremely well trained. I have no concerns about the training of pilots. They've been trained for almost every operational possibility that could happen.
Why did the TCAS device meant to avoid collisions, in this case maybe help cause one? And why Why didn't the Russian plane descend when first ordered? A language problem? Controller commands are always in English.
I knew everybody from that crew. Everybody knew English enough to speak with controller.
So who is to blame? The media spotlight now falls on controller Peter Nielsen. He was the man who'd guided the two planes towards each other. They were under his control. He must have caused them to collide.
I was as shocked as I could have been with any other name or any other colleague. I was just very sorry for him. The media coverage about the incident very often makes you angry because these statements are taken out of context. You really get the impression they just want to fill the newspaper, they write whatever they get. They go after colleagues, they give them a call at home, they follow you wherever you are.
You don't deserve to be the boogeyman for everybody. And that's something which really is still very difficult to accept, that suddenly we are some sort having to take the blame because the others are dead or the others are hiding behind politics, rules and things like this.
We started to leave this building by the underground exit, which leads through another building, just not to see anybody. They were asking people on the street in Kloten, people who were not involved at all, just to broadcast something in the evening. And that makes you angry, and you cannot resist it.
And what more do we know about this Swiss controller at the center of the investigation?
He was chased by the media. He was accused of being a murderer.
He's the man, obviously, everyone wants to talk to, but at the moment, the Swiss say he's in no position to talk. And we heard today that the Swiss authorities have opened an investigation to see whether there's enough evidence for charges of manslaughter.
The accusation was manslaughter by negligence in 71 cases. And the speciality is that in this case, the investigating judge has been working on a investigation on his own, independently from what the Aviation Investigation Board of Germany did.
Meanwhile, that investigation is underway, headed by Germany's air crash detectives, the BFU. By the fifth day, they've read all the black boxes.
So this is a typical voice recorder, which was built into the Tupolev 154. It shows two reels. The recording time of this recorder is 30 minutes, and this is rather solid, but the original voice recorder of the Tupolev was heavily damaged. So we had to remove the tape and replay it on such a specialized tape recorder.
This is the hangar where wreckage of the planes was examined.
This one here is the lower surface of the right wing of the Tupolev, and that remaining stub here went below the Tupolev and caused these scratches. That top part of the vertical tail remained at the accident site on the main wreckage of the Boeing.
But could this accident have been avoided? TCAS normally has a safeguard mechanism called a reversal. If an alert is issued and one aircraft crew ignores an instruction, TCAS orders a reversal. If the TCAS on aircraft A senses that aircraft B is still on a collision course, it will tell it to go in another direction. But it didn't. Why?
One of the major requirements for that is that both planes have to be at least 100 feet apart in altitude. But this requirement was not met at the time. That's why no reversal was given.
When the DHL's TCAS saw that the Tupolev wasn't climbing, it could only tell its pilots to descend even faster.
Increase descent.
If the reversal had been possible, the children of Ufa might have lived. July 2003. Many parents returned to Übelingen in Germany for the first anniversary. The Germans built a memorial on the site of the tragedy. It's made up of a series of giant silver pearls on a broken necklace. The head of Skyguide is among the crowd.
Can you tell us, what are the mistakes you made?
I don't think this is the time to talk about it. I'm sure you'll understand.
Have you apologized?
Okay. Thank you.
Among the parents is Vitaly Kaloyev. He asks the head of Skyguide which controller was responsible for the accident, but receives no answer.
Yes, in fact, the man asked if it is possible to meet the controller, to meet Peter, and the answer was it is not possible.
The request passes almost unnoticed, but Vitaly Kaloyev is not satisfied.
Descend. Crossing.
Meanwhile, as the investigators work, they discover a fog of confusion surrounding TCAS. When it was introduced 20 years previously, there'd been a fatal omission.
Descend flight level 350. Expedite. I have.
No one said what should happen if there was a conflict between what TCAS was saying and what the controller was saying.
It says climb.
There's no hard and fast rule to guide the pilots.
He is guiding us down.
Increase descent.
Whilst pilots in the West have always been taught to obey TCAS,
600. TCAS descent.
in the rest of the world, it's anyone's guess.
We're not accustomed to not trusting controllers. In civil aviation, there were lots of situations when pilots didn't follow instructions of the controller, and that led to plane crashes or other accidents.
The mentality of Russians is still very much in the lines of the old Soviet ways, and they're much more inclined to follow instructions than to do what they think may be appropriate. They always reckon that the other guy knows better.
The potential for a terrible accident was there, and a year and a half before the Überlingen tragedy, it nearly happened. Over Japan, 2 jumbo jets with 677 people aboard came so close that they filled each other's windscreens. The violent avoidance maneuver caused 100 people to be injured, some of them seriously. This was seconds away from being the worst plane crash in aviation history. Once again, a pilot had listened to the controller instead of his TCAS. It should have served as a warning to everyone. Yet from ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, there was only silence. ICAO is responsible for drawing up the rules of commercial aviation. German investigators say that their vagueness about how to use TCAS was one of the reasons for the Überlingen disaster.
I think this is the first time that I remember any major accident investigation, the one done by the BFU, fingering any of the aviation authorities in any serious way. And this is a serious way. So I think this is quite unique.
If ICAO had carried out a detailed investigation of the incident in Japan and made recommendations that led to changes in procedures, this probably would not have happened.
ICAO did not feel it necessary to get involved in this, and they left it entirely up to the Japanese authorities. Had it been a collision, maybe they would have got involved.
After this near miss, the Japanese government immediately asked for their guidance. But unfortunately, ICAO only acted on the request 18 months later, after the Überlingen disaster.
Perhaps the ICAO procedures and standards, but in particular operating procedures for airborne collision avoidance, were somewhat ambiguous or open to interpretation.
The Japanese incident was not the only warning ICAO received. In the 2 years leading up to the Überlingen collision, 4 other near misses happened in Europe alone because one set of pilots obeyed air traffic control instead of their TCAS.
If I have to summarize the advice that we gave the world, if a warning comes from ACAS, pilots should immediately follow it at all times. With the benefit of hindsight, you always ask yourself, could we have done more? And an accident is a wake-up call for everybody.
All of these regrets are of little comfort now to the grieving parents of Ufa.
Everything that was good is in the past and was connected with my child. All the hopes, dreams were connected with him, with his future. And now, nothing left. At least I've got nothing left. So the right way to put it is, my life didn't change. It stopped. Our pain doesn't go away, you know? It's getting stronger every year. It's getting harder to live. At first, we had a hope that she'd come back, that time would pass and things would fall into right places. And now the hope is gone. And the worst thing is that the kids were flying happy. Healthy kids were going on a vacation. And some grown-up people made a mistake, made a fatal mistake. And the kids were gone.
She was loved. She was very kind, gentle. She was the beloved daughter. Beloved daughter.
This is Kirill's room. Everything in this room is like it was when he was alive. Nothing's changed. After he was killed, there were also 2 exhibitions. One exhibition took place here, in Ufa, while the other one was in Germany, in Überlingen. And that's Kirill's last painting. He was really glad. He planned that he'd finish it when he'd get back.
Vitaly Khaloyev, the Russian architect, has lost his entire family, everything. He himself has gone to pieces. He's become obsessed with finding out who is responsible for the collision. Khaloyev decides to travel to Zurich to play out the last tragic chapter in the Überlingen story. On February the 24th, 2004, a stranger calls at the house of the controller, Peter Nielsen.
It was just the saddest thing you can imagine. I knew his family, I knew how much he loved his kids and his wife, and
the presumed perpetrator is apparently 48 years old and of Eastern origin. He is likely the father of one of the families that was killed at the crash. He likely lost his wife and both their children.
They found Vitaly Khaloyev nearby in a hotel. Suspected but not yet charged with the murder, he's presently in a psychiatric clinic while they decide whether he's fit to stand trial.
Did he have the capacity to discern? Was it an impulse, or did he have the capacity to commit a crime?
Certain traces and police evidence were found which seemed to indicate that he could be the murderer.
We are working on this theory after the accused himself conceded that he could be the murderer.
We didn't want him to be killed. We didn't want to have more victims related to that catastrophe because of our children.
The killing of the flight controller was a very, very sad event. And the saddest thing of all was that he was not actually responsible for the accident. The system responsible for the accident was the poor Skyguide management and quality control of their system.
The investigators had worked out exactly what went wrong that night at Skyguide, and how an unfortunate series of events had made disaster almost inevitable. First, Peter's colleague goes for a break, leaving him alone to watch two radar screens several feet apart.
It was a standard practice at the ATC company that at night, one air traffic controller was responsible for controlling the entire airspace of ATC Zurich.
Then, following management instructions, the maintenance men start to switch things off. Peter's radar screen is working more slowly and will not warn him if two planes are about to collide. He doesn't know that.
During the maintenance work, the radar system had to be run in fallback mode. In fallback mode, the controller has no STCA available.
STCA is short-term collision alert, a warning on the radar screen that planes are in imminent danger of collision.
He did not know that the STCA system would not be available.
Then by chance, an unexpected aircraft, the Aeroloid tourist plane, arrives at the critical moment and needs a lot of attention. It completely distracts Peter. He tries to get outside help, but the main phone system has been accidentally disconnected by the maintenance crew, and the backup phone isn't working. The controller has been robbed of all the technical support he needs.
The phone link with Friedrichshafen was down. At this time, there were various radio transmissions, and the controller had to answer them on the different frequencies.
Finally, when both planes are descending, the DHL pilots cannot tell him what's happening because the radio frequency is busy.
600, TCAS descent!
The earliest they could do that was 23 seconds later, because until then, the frequency was blocked by the ATC Zurich transmission to the Tupolev crew.
May 2004. It had taken the German BFU investigators 22 months to publish their final report. They found that the disaster had two major causes. Firstly, Peter Nielsen was too late in noticing the danger of a collision. Secondly, the Russian crew was wrong to obey him when he told them to descend, rather than their own TCAS equipment telling them to climb. But other pilots understand their dilemma.
The TCAS commands are spoken in such a dispassionate voice. Descend, increase descent, such a matter-of-fact type of voice. And then there's the voice of the air traffic controller's urgent command. Descend immediately, leave this altitude immediately, go to another altitude at once. So, whichever voice sounded more urgent was the one the crew obeyed.
Finally, the report severely criticized Skyguide for leaving a lone controller on duty that night.
We have learned our lesson, and we don't have single-manned operations or only one controller in front of a monitor anymore.
This might happen again. Another badly organized air control service or a crew might make a mistake.
You're guilty or not guilty. That's not the meaning of a final report. The meaning of a final report is facts. What has happened? Why did it happen? What are the lessons to be learned? Safety requirements.
Why didn't they provide safety during that flight, when my child was on board? They must take the responsibility for not providing security for that flight.
Mistakes were made by us also, and we regret them deeply. We acknowledge our responsibility as set out in the BFU report, and we ask the families of the victims for forgiveness.
At Skyguide in Zurich, A rose now sits in a vase in memory of Peter Nielsen and the tragedy of Uberlingen.